Hello and welcome everybody from Union Arena. Welcome to the new Deck Tech. Today we're joined by Hyperactive Gremlin and we're diving into one of the most popular and talked about decks in the current meta, Sukina from Jujutsu Kaisen. This deck is known for its greedy curve, relying on Sukina's finger to power up some of your raids and using Nanomy as a massive late game threat once your deck is down to 15 cards or fewer. It's a deck that rewards risk taking, high rolls, and knowing how to squeeze value out of every card. For newer players, this is going to be a breakdown for the basics, how the deck flows, the curve, cards rolls, and how to play around the RNG heavy style that Sukina is so unique about having. So, let's start with the big picture. How would you describe the identity of the Sukina deck? Would you call it a greedy mid-range, a combo, or something else entirely?
I would describe Sukina as the embodiment of greedy tempo, in that it loves to hit stuff off life, it loves to let the opponent exhaust themselves in order to build up its own resources to create big swing turns, in order to take the match back.
All right, now, what role do you think that Sukina plays inside of the current meta? Is it more of a aggro deck? I'm sorry, that's the wrong way for me to question it. What role do you think it plays in the current meta? Is it the aggressor, or is it more of the setup for big hitting swinging turns currently?
I believe that against most decks, it is in fact the aggressor. But against most decks above the echelon of tier 2 or tier 1, it will aim to be that more power spike tempo game plan. Because most of these underpowered decks can't exactly handle the mid to late game of Sukina, whereas these higher tier decks can. So if a deck can't handle it, you're just going to stomp them with a bunch of your raids, a bunch of your power. But if you can, then you're most likely going to want to play more passive, and the gameplay really changes when you load into something like Yellow OPM or Code Geass, and that you really want to focus on those swing turns.
So, what makes Sukina unique compared to other decks in Union Arena's meta right now? What do you think is the thing that really defines its as a identity?
I believe that what makes it unique is that it is the most pure tempo and RNG based deck right now. And because of that, I feel like a lot of players have it as some sort of category all its own. Compared to most tempo decks, I guess, in any card game, this deck has the most wild swing turns because of how the life triggers operate and just because of how much advantage you can get from one turn. But as its role in the metagame, as how people see it, it's definitely more of a luck-based strategy as more people are used to, but it still is a very high-ceiling tempo deck.
All right, so let's talk about the curve, because this is definitely a deck that plays a bit differently from most of them. How would you describe the cost curve for Sukina? Do you have strong early plays, or do you think that it's all about that mid to late game power spike that is the only thing that matters in the deck?
I would say that it does depend on what you're fighting against. If you're fighting against a deck that has answers to your raids, you're going to want to save up for that mid to late game swing turns. But if you're fighting against a deck that can't, you are going to want to put up as much pressure as possible with a bunch of impacts.
So what does a typical turn 2 to turn 4 look like when you're setting up for some of those larger swingy turns?
I would say a turn 2 to 4 would be, ideally, you are going second. So your turn 2 should be a 0 cost, then playing a Maki to dig 2, and then your turn 3 should be either your 3 cost Eugi, that is a 2-gen, or it should be more Makis and more raid targets. But ideally, by turn 4, you're going to have 2 raids, or 2 4 costs, and a full backline ready to go for next turn.
Very good on that one. So let's break down the cards and how the deck runs its engine. Can you start from your 0 costs and work your way up, going over why each of these cards is played, and explain what the greedy aspect of this deck truly is?
All right, so starting from the bottom, we have the zero cost Nobara. This is one of your primary dig tools early game, and I would say it's one of the best dig tools because it allows you to draw and pitch stuff like Sukina's Fingers to power up your Sukina, or cards to fill up the sideline just for the draw effect of the 4 cost. So this also has a draw trigger, which you will notice this deck has a ton of draw triggers. And that's because you want everything in life to either give you advantage or make the opponent lose something. Then for these, obviously, the 2 raid targets, you're going to want to run 4 minimum, well, maximum, I guess, for these. They're really good. Obviously, they don't do anything, but you need them to play. Great to open a bunch of because you do tend to spam raids out. And then, the reason I run Eno is because he is a draw trigger again, but he is a 0 cost with a trigger. And how the ratios work in this game, I would prefer to be at around 14 zeros because this deck, as you can see, runs no 1 cost bodies. So your curve is really depending on how many zeros you open. So having at least 14 really helps with that. And then moving up to Maki.
Yep, skipping completely over 1, by the way. No,
Yeah.
you're not. The deck does, because there's not currently a 1 drop that Sukuna players seem to want to run.
There will be, but at the moment, not yet.
Yes.
And for a 2 cost, this is your primary curve tool, and it is great. It digs 2 cards. On play, you reveal the top 2 cards of your deck, you add 1 to your hand, and then you send the other to your sideline. And you don't have to tell the opponent what you're adding, but the main strength is that this is essentially a draw to discard 1, essentially, which is what Sukuna does. And that effect is obviously very, very good. Attached to a 2 cost, it can become a 3k. So it has some blocking power, but most of the time, it's just a really, really good dig tool. You're going to be digging around 5 cards in the early 3 turns, which is pretty good outside of your draws for turn. Then moving up, we don't run any other 2 costs. That's pretty much the only one that's worth it. I wouldn't run 2 costs like Gojo because you only need a maximum of 4 energy with this deck, and pretty much everything in the deck, as I said before, you want to give you advantage, either on the play or in life. And Maki, she doesn't have a trigger, which does kind of suck, but her effect is too good to really warrant removing her.
Ready.
And speaking of good cards that really we can't warrant removing, this 3 cost Eugi. This is an incredibly important card for your mid to late game. It's a 2-gen, which means if you have this and 2 other cards in the energy line, you could just save a spot for raid cards. You could save a spot to move things up. It's really good. If you have 2, that means you're just set. You could just spam raids from the other 2 slots. It can become a 4k blocker, which is very important in some matchups. And all around, it's just a great card. And mildly important, it is the only active trigger in this deck. While most of the deck has draw triggers, like these 2 and a bunch of the events, having an active trigger in the deck is nice because that means this bumps up the amount of live triggers on defense. I guess up to a really, really good amount compared to most decks. Because you have the Eugis, you have the raid Eugis, then you have the Nanomys, and the ratio collapses, which means that a lot of the times when the opponent is attacking in, if you let them, most of the time you're going to get something to help you. So you don't actually have to chump as much in this deck as you would in other decks. And then moving up to the 4 costs. This is the color trigger of the deck. He's not that great. I don't run maximum copies of him, but he is important. His effect is that you can remove 7 cards from the sideline to draw 3 cards on play. And then if you have 15 or less cards in deck, he gains impact. And he is a 4 cost action too. So not the greatest trade of value, but he does help for confirming getting to the 15 card threshold. And late game, he can become another pressure tool. What I do like him for is that early game, if you have him and you dig through enough cards, he just changes the board space because they have to immediately deal with the 4K threat for most decks. And I like that he has the blue color trigger. It's not the greatest one in the world, but it is good enough to warrant running more than 2 of him, just so that if you open one and you decide to sack it, you know that you'll still have some left in the deck, because he is important. And another reason he is important is that the amount of raid targets for cards, I guess, like Nanomy is very, very important. If you notice, I have Sukina and Eugi, so that is 7 raids for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 targets. That already isn't great. Most decks that you will see have 4 raids and then 8 targets for that raid. So this deck doesn't have a whole ton of targets to disperse around. So you're going to want to max out where you can. And I've seen a lot of lists run 4 of this, which is perfectly fine if you want to max out on targets. But again, it's good to keep note that the reason why I have to run this, it's a target, you do need it, and it is your color trigger. And then for the raid 4 costs, I will start with Sukina. He's really the face of the deck. On play, he draws 2 and then discards 1. And then, depending on the amount of fingers you have, at 1, he is a 5k on your turn. Then at 2, he gains impact. So early game, he could be an insane aggression tool. And late game, if you save 1 or 2, you could plop them down on the field, guaranteed game, just because of the really easy impact game. And him being a 4 cost, really good. Just overall, insane card. You absolutely want to max out on this. And then, Nanomy. He is probably the second best card in the deck behind Sukina. He has a lot of different roles, and I would say that he is probably the most important card on defense. And his effect is that if there are 15 or less cards in your deck, he gains damage 2 and impact 1 and becomes a permanent 5k. So when Sukina is only a 5k on your turn, he's a 5k on their turn. So he's a really good blocker. And then his regular effect is when sidelined, you can send the top 2 cards of your deck to the sideline to switch a character on your opponent's front line to resting. So in essence, he is also a double blocker, which is very, very good, at least right now, being that there's a lot of cards that you really can't let hit, but, you know, they might have impact, or they might have damage 2, or they might be too big for your other bodies. So if you have a Nanomy, you can just sack him, rest something else, and then you're safe for that turn. Come next turn, you could start spamming raids again. So he's really important, and he is your main pressure tool late game. So if you don't jump with him and you decide to keep him, the opponent now has to decide whether or not they want to get rid of him. Because his when sidelined isn't only from battle. It could be from effects, it could be from triggers. Realistically, you're only going to get it from battle, but in the off chance that the opponent decides to waste a removal spell on him, he becomes also another form of interaction on the board, being that they have to make the choice of, do they want to kill Nanomy so that we don't get the impact late game, but have to deal with the effect now and lose tempo? Or do we wait for late game where they potentially might have more pressure tools? So overall, really good card. Definitely you're going to want to max out on it. Then the last raid in the deck is Raid Eugi. I only run 3 of it. That is because we don't have enough targets to go around, really. So that's a bit of a struggle compared to your Nanomys, being that these targets only for him, but these Eugis, you have to share them with the Sukina. But I would say Eugi is probably the best thing to hit off life in the entire game right now.
It's pretty
because
good.
He's pretty good. On play, he bounces, he puts a 4,000 or less card on the front line back to the opponent's hand. And that is insane on defense. Sometimes, if you want, on offense, he just opens up a hole in their defense, then you just have enough damage to push through. He can be used for stopping early aggression. If the opponent wants to set up, you just play him down. They need to use another AP next turn. Pretty good at stopping that, but overall, not as great as these two, but still really, really good. And you do want to open at least one of him in hand or see him in life every game. So that's why I run 3 and not 4.
I will say, just as a part of the card itself, I like to go over just minor rulings in case anybody is very new to the game and they want to make sure that they're playing properly. When you return a raided character to their hand, the raid target, the bottom card, goes to sideline. The top card goes to their hand. So it does make a very impactful play against raiders, especially against other greedy decks that might not have as many raid targets.
Yes, Yuji is very good at essentially starving them of targets if they decide to overcommit to a board.
Absolutely. But we can continue on over to the events. One of the most important cards in the entire deck, the Finger.
Now, for the Sukina's Fingers, what it does is that optionally you can pay a life to use it. You really don't want to do that, but it's there if you can. And the effect is to draw 1 card, then recharge one of your AP cards. So it essentially draws you a card for free. And the primary way you're going to do that is the alternative cost to use it. And that is, instead of paying a life, you can switch an active Yugi Itadori on your front or back line to resting. Then that pays for the cost itself. And obviously, your Sukina's Fingers, you're going to need them for Sukina. This deck only needs 2 in the sideline to get the most value. But we do run 4 because it is a tool to dig. It's really good just for cycling through cards. It's free, and it essentially reduces your deck count by 4 because all of these are just another card. So, really good card. Definitely max out on it. I would say that it is probably the most important event in your deck. Just generally, you do need to see at least 2 over the course of a game just to guarantee winning.
2 of those early with the Sukuna has won more games in UA than probably any other combination that I've seen.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so moving along, yes.
Other events. Jujutsu High First Years. This event is a bit weird. You don't have to run it. Optionally, you could change in a bunch of other stuff that costs 3, costs 2, even some 1 costs. But why I run it is because the effect is, as a 3-cost action 1, it draws 3 cards and then you discard 2. It is very, very good for confirming 15 cards in deck for Nanomy, and it is very, very good just for digging for stuff like domains, removal spells, or even fueling the sideline for the 4-cost. Or, I guess, alternatively, the best case scenario would be discarding Fingers off of this. But it just seals the package around very nicely. More oftentimes than not, you're not going to use this card very often, but if you get the chance to, it is very, very, very good. And for the final and special triggers of the deck, obviously, we run 4 of the card that recharges your AP. Something about this deck, though, is that since you dig so many cards deep, you're most likely going to see 2 of these at least a game. And this deck really loves seeing them because of how many cards you have in your hand. You could just spam out bodies, you could just spam out more dig tools. It's just overall probably one of the best enablers for this deck specifically. Other decks, of course, they love drawing their final triggers, but this one in particular really, really gains an advantage off of it just because of how much stuff it opens up. And then the special trigger.
One of the most annoying specials in the entire game.
This is probably the best special trigger in the entire game.
Yeah.
The effect is that you can choose one character on the front line with 5,000 BP or less, and the opponent chooses whether or not to put it on the top or bottom of the deck. If you have a Nanomy on your field, then it becomes your choice. That effect is very, very good because a lot of cards, like Nanomy, have effects when they hit the sideline. And a lot of cards gain advantage next turn when you use them. So this card guarantees, even if you don't have a Nanomy, it guarantees they won't trigger sideline effects, and it guarantees that they either waste a draw on it, or you know exactly what's in their hand coming next turn. Or if the opponent decides to put it at the bottom of the deck, you know, you'll never have to deal with it again. So it's overall insane removal tool, really good. Definitely the best special in the game right now, just because of its versatility and stopping sideline effects.
I want to argue with that, but I don't think I can. I'm trying to think of one that might be better. Yeah, that's pretty damn good.
Yeah, and well, that's the main deck.
All right, now moving right along, let's talk about the downside of this deck. What do you think is really the worst matchup for Sukuna to try to deal with?
I think the worst matchups are probably purple Code Geass and yellow OPM.
Oh.
And the reasoning between both of those is different. For Code Geass's entire game plan is dealing with 4Ks and forcing bodies. JJK loves to sack damage, but they do not love to get rid of bodies early. And Geass, their entire game plan really does just counter it. They have basically all the raids to deal with ours. They have all the removal spell to hurt our setup turns. And realistically, they don't care about any of our flash cards like Nanomy or Eugi, to the point where a lot of our removal isn't going to be as good as theirs to our front line. And then for yellow OPM, the reason why I think that is such a bad matchup is that a lot of the time, you're not going to be putting up very much pressure, especially if they get a good enough turn. The matchup is a little luck dependent on if they open up enough Saitamas, but if they open up at least 2, you're going to be on the back foot for a lot of the game because you can't block them realistically with anything except for Nanomy. So a lot of the times the games are going to come down to who opened better. And with a deck as good as Sukuna, that is one of its worst matchups.
All right. So I think that covers the majority of what we wanted to get through here today. Big thanks to you, Hyperactive. Very nice to sit down and hear your thoughts on the Sukuna deck and helping other people to hopefully pick up this deck and start having fun, especially right before Volume 2 releases. I think this deck changes quite a bit come Volume 2 and does return to one of the top contenders in our meta. For more deck techs, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe here. And if you're interested in seeing any more long form content or any other more in-depth videos, you can find me down in the description below, ProDMJoey. Thank you all very much and have a great day. Goodbye.